Well, good morning, Dr. Arthur Ciaramicoli, the author of these two books, which I have in my hands, The Soulful Leader and the Stress Solution, using empathy and cognitive behavioral therapy to reduce anxiety and develop resilience. We need a little bit of that right now. But today we're going to talk about a different book. Which one is that? The Triumph, what a wonderful picture. I wonder who took that. The Triumph of Diversity. If we could, can we pause that for a moment and talk about, because right now we are in unprecedented time in our lives. I know that in human history this has happened before, but right now we are facing a very serious virus to which the likes of humankind has not seen before.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we could both agree that there's a lot of anxiety out there around this. There's a lot of pent-up emotion. People want to get out. They want to do things. They've lost their social means to maybe go have a beverage and listen to some music, go out and split a pizza with another family. Any could you give like a really short piece of advice for the people?
Well, a couple of things, Bob, that people already know about. Don't rely on hand sanitizers as much as soap. That's critically important. Wash your hands. If you go out and have to go to a supermarket, remain distant from other people and have gloves on. Thirdly, actually, many scientists are recommending supplementing with vitamin D3, at least 2,000 to 4,000 international units. In terms of information, you're right. This is a very critical time. It's a very, very dangerous virus. Social distancing is absolutely critical. The other thing that's important in terms of lessening your anxiety, social distance from politicians as well. Listen to the scientists. Dr. Tony Fauci is one of the leading scientists in this regard in the world. He's a Holy Cross graduate, by the way. So go to the CDC and listen to Dr. Fauci's updates every day. He's on TV almost all the time now. He's on in the morning, in the noon, at night, but every day he updates the CDC. I think it's very important to stay in touch with your relatives and friends. Thank God we have this technology that we can communicate. But remember, sometimes you're going to hear information that's inaccurate. Don't be aggressive and confront people. If you hear something, one of these conspiracy theories that this is a hoax and on, and it was invented by some, religious group or whatever, and it's all over the internet, go to the CDC and don't get angry with your relative who heard this somehow. Just say, give them a private message. Don't put it in a chat and embarrass them. And then when you're talking to people, say, gee, I was on the CDC this morning and Dr. Fauci said this or that. Why don't you go there? I think it's a great opportunity to update you and your family every day.
That's fantastic. And he really does a wonderful job in putting it all in perspective. It's dire straits, and hopefully they're going to find a vaccine soon. They'll discover a way to have a nice, safe vaccine. And moving on to your book about diversity, how do you define diversity? And I suppose you're talking about diversity in human contact and relations.
Well, I wrote this book, Bob, because I'm so concerned about what's happening in our country in terms of prejudice and an increase in hate crimes. Diversity means that you're open-minded and you look beyond what you see on the surface, and you can see into the heart and souls of other people and realize that we're all more alike than we are dissimilar. And the rates of prejudice in our society right now, which I think is even making it worse during this virus, we've had an increase in the largest increase in anti-Semitism in our history. We have a tremendous increase in Islamophobia. It's gone up 67% in 2 years. There was a recent Gallup study, actually 4 to 6 months ago, that indicated that Hispanics and Blacks feel like they don't belong here and they feel less safe in this country than they have in many years. So this is happening on all fronts. Race relations are at the poorest. Discrimination in terms of LGBTQ people is very high, and trans people are facing discrimination in the 90th percentile in the workplace. 42% of women say there's gender discrimination in the workplace. And the U.S. in 1960, in 2 years ago, ranked 28th in gender equality. Now we rank 51st out of 149 nations in the world.
And is that 4 months ago?
Yeah.
Okay, well, now what? And these days, I think the Chinese get added to that high discrimination figure now because of the origin of the virus.
Yes, yes. And rather than be angry at one group or another, at some point or another, according to Dr. Fauci, everybody was going to be confronted with this virus.
And that what that means is that they're going to be infected by it.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, we have to remember that most people who are infected become ill with flu-like symptoms. A temperature, and one of the key signs of this virus is that you lose some of your taste buds. You start to taste things that seem neutral. You can't really distinguish between foods as easily. That's one of the signs. So is everybody going to get it? Not necessarily. But as Dr. Fauci indicates, we have not reached the peak yet. What we've seen in China and South Korea is this virus reaches a peak and then it goes this way if we quarantine. We're about 70% up the mountain. We still have another rise to go. And then hopefully, if we quarantine, we'll come down. Interestingly, one of my patients is a physician who worked with Dr. Fauci over the years.
Wow.
And we had a phone conversation yesterday, and he said he believes if we quarantine, if we follow social distancing and we follow the facts of the scientists, and he has enormous admiration for Dr. Fauci, he believes the summer will be much better. But let's see, we have to do this. Governor Baker was very disappointed with seeing all the people playing in tennis and Frisbee and so forth down in Boston. And Governor Cuomo walked Central Park last weekend with the police and said he just couldn't believe it. He does not understand why people aren't getting it. He said Central Park was more populated than he'd ever seen it. And
Well, do you think that people might believe that they are social distancing by going out and staying in those types of places and walking?
As Governor Cuomo said, you don't play basketball. You don't play basketball very good if you're social distancing. And he was watching these kids play, and obviously they're not social distancing.
The Hopkinton police did disperse last week a group of kids playing basketball at the courts by the middle school. They responded to a complaint by a neighbor that 10 kids were socializing in the yard on the was it the western side of town. So a lot of people don't get it. You're right. And I think what a lot of people don't understand, and because I think you're getting mixed messages sometimes on those television shows, those presentations, because as I see it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but as I see it, the reason that we're social distancing, the reason that we're quarantining, is because the virus, not because we're going to stop the virus, but we're going to stop the peak. We're going to tamp the peak down, because if we didn't, there wouldn't ever be enough hospital beds to take care of the sick. So we've got to slow it down, tamp it down, so that the next group of sick people will have a place to go.
Mm-hmm. Eventually, our bodies will develop immunity to the virus. The more
you think
people
so?
have it,
That's how it works?
Yeah, and that will happen, and that's happened in China. Look, I have a client in China. We do Zoom sessions, and he told me that 70 to 80% of the Chinese workers are back to work.
That's wonderful.
So
but they did, and how did they do that?
It's going to end. We have to have the faith that it will end.
I have to tell you, speaking of the Chinese who have been so brutally discriminated against during this outbreak, I went to the Dynasty to pick up some food last night, and I had the best beef and bean sprouts with oyster sauce. Now, tell them I sent you if you go there, because to pick it up, because my dad used to make that when I was a teenager, and what a delightful dish it is. And it's not on the menu; they do it just for me, so I'm really happy.
You're special to them. It brings up another point in terms of diet. If antioxidants in plant-based diets are very plentiful and beneficial. So if you want to strengthen your immune system, try to stay as close to a Mediterranean or plant-based diet as possible.
Now, on this diversity, how do you solve the problem of prejudice?
Well, you know, a couple of things. We have to get away from groupthink, which is, I think, what happens when people just follow blindly because they want to belong. They feel insecure because they don't have a lot of connections in life. And, you know, in this book, I interviewed Christian Picciolini. He was one of the leading neo-Nazi white supremacists in this country. He was actually second in command. And I interviewed him because he's come out of that group and for several years now and found a foundation to help people, help young people move from those hate groups. But Christian was recruited when he was 14. He had very little relationship with his father, and he was recruited very quickly by the leader of the neo-Nazi white supremacist group in the country. To make a long story short, I interviewed him because I wanted to understand not only how he got into it, but how did he get out of it? He got out of it by having exposure to more people, and that's what diversity is about. He had a store in Chicago, where a record store where he sold white supremacist neo-Nazi music and literature. And one by one, and people from these interfaith groups came in, like a black man came in, a Jewish man came in, a gay couple came in. And he saw people as human beings, and he realized these people are nowhere near as bad as I've been told. So a lot of times we grow up with prejudice against ourselves and other people. And unless we have exposure, you know, human beings have this stranger sensitivity. When we see somebody who doesn't look like us or doesn't seem to dress like us, we get a little afraid. If we move forward, and research has proven this, and we reach out, we try to talk to the person next to us, maybe not right now because of the distancing issue, but when we engage people who don't look like us, we find the commonality. That's what empathy is. Empathy is the heart of diversity. It allows us to see beyond the cover and not maintain the prejudices we grew up with, the prejudices toward ourselves and other people. I mean, that's been my life work, to help people reduce prejudice against themselves and others. And that's why this book is so important.
Where does it all begin? Where does the prejudice begin?
I mean, it begins in your own home, of course. I mean, I interviewed, one of the first stories in this book is about a Midwestern fella. He looks a lot like Luke Bryan from American Idol, you know, that tall, a little kind of goofiness to his personality, but a very nice man. And I knew he had goodness within him, but he said to me, you know, I'm really glad I met you because my last psychologist in Michigan was Jewish. I felt uncomfortable. I said, well, how come you felt uncomfortable? He said, I don't know. I don't know. It's just that, you know, I never knew any Jewish people, you know. I'm so glad you're a Christian. I said, how do you know I'm a Christian? He said, you're not a Christian? What about your last name? I said, what about my last name? He said, well, you're Italian. I said, do you know there's 48,000 Italian Jews in Italy right now?
It's probably more in Manhattan.
Do you know that 1,100 Italian Jews died in Auschwitz? He said, you're Jewish? I said, I didn't say what I am. I said, but I can tell you feel different at this moment. And we went on to talk, and he joined one of my groups, which has, I have 3 ongoing groups, leadership and communication groups, and he joined one for 18 months. And he related to Jewish people and Hispanic people and Black people, somebody from Central Africa. And eventually he developed the openness which took him away from the fear of basing his opinions of people by how they look. And in the end, our last session was very poignant because he said to me, you know, you have a home office. I never see your wife and kids. I said, what makes you think I have a wife and kids? He said, oh, Jesus Christ. He goes, you're telling me now you're a gay Jewish psychologist? And I said, does it matter? And he said, not really. I'm over that. And that's what I call the triumph of diversity.
That's wonderful. What a great story. And, you know, you always have great stories, but what do you suggest for people entering an environment that is diverse and seeing these people for the first time?
Be open-minded. Use your empathy. Try to find the common ground. We are an international community now, we are exposed to people from all different aspects of life, different religions, different continents, different races. Be open. Try to be open. Try to slow down your reactions. Quick reactions usually mean we're coming from the past. One of my clients took his family not long ago to New York City, and he had a man behind him who he was absolutely convinced was a terrorist because he was dressed in Islamic attire. And he said, I literally started sweating. He's in one of my groups. And when he left the train station in Providence and he got out, the man tapped him on the shoulder and he reacted like this, scared. And he said, your daughter dropped your doll. And he gave him the doll, and he said, "Oh my God, I felt like such a fool."
Well, let's say, and that's a great story. How can people um, continue along those lines? Should they join? Should they visit other religious institutions? As you may know, well, in Hopkinton, you spoke at Martin Luther King Day,
Yes.
which didn't include a lot of Black people because that's the makeup of Hopkinton. One time, I'm not sure of his name, so I'll get back to that one. So here we are in a new type of environment. Let's go to Maine in our minds right now and think about the total lack of diversity. Although you have a lot of mixed backgrounds up there. There's some from Sweden, some from Norway, some from Germany, and some from England, and so forth.
And they have a large Somali population right now.
In which is it citywide or it's statewide?
It's in some of the cities in Lewiston and those cities. Yeah.
And so they haven't seen this. People from Maine I've spoken with are not happy that the summer people, as they call them, the people from away, are coming up there to escape what's happening down here.
Yeah, the governor of Maine has asked people who have summer homes to not travel to Maine, and the number of the beaches are closed.
Wow.
But in terms of your question about what do you do, one of the chapters in the book of the Triumph of Diversity is an interfaith chapter, and I had just such great experiences with interviewing Muslims, Christian leaders, priests from around the area, atheists as well, because there's a lot of prejudice against atheists. But some I include in the book one of the videos that this young man had made, and he's a Hopkinton senior, Furqan Saeed. He did a PBS special and when he was 16, and even before that, his dad showed me one that he did when he was 14, talking about the openness and that people should have. And I asked him at one point, because people would make fun of his name, and he even told me when Osama bin Laden was killed, people were going up to him and saying, well, how was his family doing, and so forth and so on. And he said to me, I was born right down the street, just like you were. I don't know Osama bin Laden. And I said, does it make you angry? And he said, no, in our religion, we're taught to educate, not be angry. And I thought that was, from a young boy's heart, was so open. He said, we're taught to educate. And the number of Muslim leaders, I have found that they're so willing to talk and trying to be understood. And the interfaith groups, there's a One Spirit Center in Framingham, and then there's the Interfaith Dialogue in Holliston, just great groups. Father Carl Chuddy from the Fatima Shrine in Framingham, what a lovely person. And then there's a Sikh leader in Millis, Siri Kam Kahalsa. The three of us met, and then I've met many other leaders in the interfaith community, and they are so kind to each other. And Siri Kam said to me, one of the things I try to educate people about is that there's all these branches of the tree, and we're going to the same place, which is God. We're just going from a different road, a different turnpike, whatever it is, but we're all going in different ways. We're all trying to get to the same place. And I would encourage people to look into the One Spirit Center or the Interfaith Dialogue in Holliston, because they have free talks and have workshops where you just hear from different religious leaders, and they're all trying to encourage empathy, compassion, and the reduction of prejudice.
And if you don't mind, I'll mention your name to Imam at the Islamic Center on Wood Street, because they have. Oh, do you know him?
No, I don't know him, but I was wanting to meet him, and I had a few introductions by one of the Episcopal leaders, and then I think he left the church he retired, and then I didn't hear more. So I wish that I had got to meet him, actually.
It's a wonderful time. They celebrate the birthday of Martin Luther King every year, but
Mhm.
not on the same day that the school and the town does, just
Mhm.
so they would have not compete with them. And they have food afterward,
Mhm.
and interfaith services, mostly the children performing skits and um, that are of the same subject of race relations and
Mhm.
Dr. King. So it's a wonderful time, and I'll ask him to put you on the list because
Well, that would be
I think
great.
you'd
I would
enjoy it.
appreciate that.
Watch the food though. There's one thing that's very, very hot. If you would think hot pepper, think 100 times hot pepper. It's hot stuff. But not all. It's delicious food. It's wonderful. Um, Societies themselves. Uh, are there societies that are damaged as a whole by the lack of diversity, or sometimes they find strength in their singularity? You know, the fact that they all have a certain religion or a certain color, but how is that damaging?
But it's a superficial strength, because when we only stick to the people who look like us and think like us, we don't have the expansive ideas. We limit our creativity and we limit our potential. If you look at the research in business, in corporations, and educational institutions, diverse groups do the best. Why? If you get 10, 50-year-old white men in a room and they're trying to figure out what to bring to the marketplace, you get the same ideas over and over again. If you get 10 people of different religions, different races, different genders, you open up the world and you see much more. So, and also, we know from studies with children, credible studies by psychologists with children, when they grow up in diverse environments, they feel far less uneasy. They have lower rates of anxiety, lower rates of depression. They feel much more comfortable with people in general. They're less fearful. And there's much lower rates of bullying in the schools that are diverse. We also know that communities and nations that have the highest rates of empathy tend to have the highest rates of agreeableness, openness, less prejudice, less anxiety, and less depression as well. So not only do nations, communities, schools, everyone does better when there's a tolerance for diversity. And empathy is the heart of diversity, because that's what allows us to see beyond the surface.
You know, I had in my own life an example of that with children of a friend who always talked about their social worker and described this man to a T. How he was wonderful to them, he was funny, and described all his attributes. And then the day I met him, I happened to notice he was black, which would have been the first thing I would have said about the man back then. Of
Yeah.
course, we live and we learn, don't we? And we learn to reach back, I think, and take those great lessons that we've learned, that our parents and our grandparents gave us, because
Yeah.
they came from other places too.
Yes.
Well, now, what is the best way to lessen? How can we get everybody together? How can we lessen this prejudice in society?
Well, I think we have to be careful about groupthink. We have to expand our empathic ranges so that we see beyond the surface. We have to try to reach out to people who seem different or strange. You know, people develop anxiety, we know from, again, from other credible research, just based on faces. When we see an unfamiliar face, we kind of withdraw. Don't allow yourself to do that. Move in rather than moving back. And don't assume you know much about that other person. And realize that we are making decisions in seconds about other people. You know, years ago when I worked in a hospital, I did a study where I had 10 people on one side of a one-way mirror and 10 people on the other side. The people on this side couldn't see the people on this side. So I asked these people, tell me what those 10 people are about. Of course, they felt kind of uncomfortable. I said, no, go tell me what they're about. After about 10 or 15 minutes, it was like they were writing a book about these people. Oh, that guy, he's probably an accountant. He probably came from Dover, a rich family. Oh, that person's a blue collar guy. That woman, oh, she probably came from Weston. Oh, no, that one came from Woonsocket. You can tell just the way they move. All kinds of stories. And everybody was laughing at the end, because I said at the end of an hour, we have just written a book about 10 people we've never met. You can't hear them talk. All we are looking at is a room where they're interacting with each other. We can't see anything except their faces. Yet they came up with all kinds. We do that all the time.
Well, when you say groupthink, it's been a long time since I've read 1984 by George Orwell, but I'm pretty sure that's where that originated in the popular sphere. How does groupthink come about?
Well, groupthink comes about based on insecurity, because as with Christian Picciolini, the neo-Nazi, former neo-Nazi, he was longing for a connection. It's how cults are formed, gangs are formed. They give people initially a sense of togetherness, a sense of family. And then later on, people realize that this can be very destructive, at least hopefully they realize. But people are looking for leaders. And when you have that cult-like kind of leaders who demonize other people, they ostracize, they don't want to unite, they want to separate, as white supremacists do. They encourage a lack of diversity. It's us and them. Those are the bad guys, we're the good guys. And hopefully as people mature, we see that that's not true. But we have to examine as adults. It's our responsibility as adults to examine the prejudices we grew up with. What did we hear in our own homes? You know, I remember I asked my dad, and I talked about this in the book. We used to watch NFL football on Saturdays together, and there were no New England Patriots, and we watched the New York Giants. And I said, Dad, you know, how come there's no black quarterbacks? And he said, well, some people think they're not as intelligent. That's why they're not quarterbacks. And right at that moment, I think I was in the 8th grade, I wanted to ask him, do you think that? But I didn't ask him because I didn't want to hear him say that. And I had a sense that he might, but I didn't know. But I didn't want to hear because I didn't want to think that. There was something in me that did not want to think that. But remember back then, and look now, we have all these incredible black athletes who are obviously just as bright and probably more talented than many white quarterbacks. Not all, but I'm generalizing. But we know that it wasn't true, okay? But people believed it back then. You know, when I grew up, what did I hear? The Irish were drunks, the Italians are in the mob, the Jews were cheap, the blacks were lazy, the gays were going to hell, on and on and on. None of it was true. None of it was true.
Well, you know, you just struck when you said Italians. You know, there's out of all the groups, the media, I think, has demonized Italians the most. You look back to the Untouchables, which most people, you know, under 60 probably don't know what I'm talking about, but
they know The Sopranos.
And well, The Sopranos is the uprising again of that type of thinking that all Italians are in the. I mean, I believe it is so prevalent and it is so strong that I wonder when I meet an Italian I don't know, and then if they are connected, then you wonder also, well, gee, they're from that town, that particular town, and there's a town that Hopkintonians will comment in that regard. If you say he's from that town, they will think, well, we know that that's where they all are. So that's been on my mind a lot lately, and I think part of the Italian the prejudice against Italians has also demonized Christopher Columbus unjustly. I heard a graduate student say that. As I was talking to someone a couple I just met regarding Columbus and regarding the demonization of him, she butted in and said, well, that's because he committed genocide. I said, what? How can you say that? She says, I'm a biologist. And the diseases that he brought. I said, well, and so, you know, I'm thinking of today's situation right now. And how she would feel, whose fault that is with the virus. So it's, yeah, Howard Zinn was the main demonizer.
There's probably not any group that hasn't been demonized or hasn't been characterized unfairly. What I'm trying to achieve in this book, because we're at a time where prejudice is rising, not decreasing. It's 2020, and it is worse. I mean, the cover of this book, look at these little kids. They're all from different backgrounds, different countries, and they're playing, and they had a great time with each other. In the back, you can see them laughing. And my daughter our daughter is a kindergarten teacher, and she will tell you when the kids are out in the playground, whether they're from India or Australia or England or the United States, or they're black or white or yellow, they're all out there playing. They don't know the difference. The boys hold each other's hands, they're hugging each other, they're all playing. But by the time they're in 4th or 5th grade, you see a change. Why is that? Because they're learning from their family. We're uncomfortable with I did a video. I don't know if you saw the trailer for the Triumph of Diversity. And in that, I would encourage people to watch it because I think it's interesting in any event. And it wasn't done by me. I'm not complimenting me. It was done by one of the marketing people for the publishing group. But in it, there's a young woman with a hijab. And one of my clients, I was doing a phone session with her, and she said to me, "Gee, I don't know why you have terrorists in that trailer for your book. That's not going to help you." And I said, "What terrorists?" She goes, "Well, that woman with that thing on her head." I said, "You mean the young girl with that thing on her head?" I said, "You know what that thing on her head is." And I said, "She's a terrorist? How do you?" "Well, they're all terrorists." And I'm telling you, this is an actual conversation of a woman who owns her own company. She's a CEO of a small business company. And she has a bachelor's degree and an MBA from prestigious universities. And she's not a bad person, but she has this misinformation. And then she went on to say that, and I said, "No, that's not true. That's not true." "Well, I don't know why you're defending them." I said, "I am defender of the truth. It's not
exactly
true. And I'll tell you why it's not true." I said, "I have interviewed and had conversations with many Muslims. They do not believe those people are even Muslim. They're not followers of Islam. You are identifying a young girl, characterizing her negatively, demonizing her. You don't know her."
And that happened to me, and I may have told you before about the trip I made with my grandmother down Washington Street in Boston. When I was about 3 years old, holding her hand. I remember reaching up, holding her hand, and I saw the first black person that I had ever seen live, going to Jordan Marsh or something like that. And I made a fuss, like, "What's that? What's going on over there?" And the guy obviously saw me because I was just a kid wanting to know. And she picked me up and shushed me as the man walked by, apparently not very pleased with the situation. And she told me, after he walked by, I said, "What's going on?" in my own 3-year-old way. And she said, "Well, that's a man with black skin. And he's just a different color than we are on the outside. But he's the same as us on the inside." So I thought that was a great lesson, and kind of speaks to what you just said too.
That was a great lesson from a woman who was exposed, I'm sure, to a lot of prejudice in her time. So that was pretty amazing.
She was Irish. My mother's family was Irish, right off the boat, and my grandfather came here at 7 years old, and when he turned 17, he went back to fight the Germans in France in the trenches. So you've got both sides of that. What's moving forward? Your book is one way to bring people together. Any other ways?
Well, again, the open-mindedness, the participating in groups like interfaith groups, I think that's a great idea. I think these groups are doing tremendous work, and they're right here in our area. So go to the Metro West Dialogue Project, and go to the One Spirit Center, and go to their websites and see what they're offering and get involved. But the other thing is, what's very important is we all hear prejudicial statements by other people, and people probably that we love and care about, but don't be silent. Silence implies approval and agreement. And don't be aggressive, but just say, like I said with the man who came from the Midwest and didn't want a Jewish psychologist, just ask open-ended, tactful questions. How did you learn that? Where did you get that information? What makes you think that? Explain it to me. I'd like to understand it.
There's a couple of things that you said to me one time about what the problems going on in society now that are leading to this kind of prejudice. And one of them was mind reading. The other one, let's see, I can't recall, which I had in my head earlier. And those are great subjects and perspectives to talk about at another time. I want to show everyone that book again. Wonderful. And what I said earlier, what a wonderful photograph. And let's chat again soon. Thanks so much, Dr. Arthur Ciaramicoli, and the triumph of diversity.
Take care. Be well.
Thanks.
Be safe.
Bye-bye.